Hello everybody, this is Giancarlo Aulino, and in this segment we're going to get some insight on what it's like to be a sports broadcaster. To help us out today, we're happy to be joined by our guest. He's been entertaining sports fans for 20 years and co-hosts Tim and Sid on Sportsnet, Tim Micallef. Hello Tim, welcome to Be On The Game.
Giancarlo, thanks for having me, buddy.
How are you today?
I'm very good. We got through another mediocre show, so I'm happy with that. And I didn't get fired, so I'm happier with that.
Sounds good. Tim, you've been involved in sports broadcasting for 20 years. At what point did you decide that this was something you wanted to pursue, and what interests you most about the profession?
I realized it was something that I wanted to do when I realized that I was a terrible athlete. Like, I grew up in a family of pretty athletic dudes. My brothers all played. I'm the youngest of four boys. My three brothers either played junior B hockey or CIS, now youth sports football. And as I got to like grade 9, grade 10, I was cursed with the knowledge of all the games that I was playing that I probably wasn't that good. So I said, how do I stick around this business? And someone suggested, why don't you talk about the games? And because I grew up in the family that I did, I already kind of had a base for all the sports. You know, my family were kind of hockey and football guys, but I loved basketball growing up. And I thought, you know what, if I'm not an athlete, if I'm not good enough to make it to the next level, why don't I focus on this? So it's kind of, you know, like the curse was actually a blessing. The curse of not being that good was a blessing because I refocused early and realized that this was something that I really wanted to do.
We mentioned earlier, you're currently hosting Tim and Sid with Sid Sixero on Sportsnet. For those out there that may be unfamiliar with your show and decide to maybe tune in for the first time, how would you describe Tim and Sid to them?
Two dudes talking about sports is probably my best. I feel like our show at its best should be like your best conversations in the basement at your nonna's house after eating turkey on Thanksgiving. Like, I feel like it's the Christmas conversation, you know, once everyone's had their dinner and they're just sitting in front of the TV. That's the show at its best. We'll try to bring some knowledge. We'll try to bring some fun. We'll try and bring something beyond just the scores, the news, or the stats and the highlights. It's a comfortable conversation that with people that you feel comfortable with, and that's probably my best explanation of the show.
So do you feel that your show implements more of a podcast approach compared to traditional old radio shows, like, you know, like primetime sports? Like, do you enjoy that podcast environment, so to speak?
Yeah, I think I think that's a great way. Like, we try and involve the best from every medium. We'll go to Twitter. We'll go to the internet. We'll show things live on TV. It's supposed to feel like a radio show because I feel like radio is more intimate, but it's supposed to have the looseness of a podcast where I feel people are more relaxed. So I think it's a solid point, Giancarlo. Like, that's kind of what we're looking for. We're looking for all the best aspects of a podcast, all the best aspects of a TV show, and all the best aspects of a radio show. Although we don't accomplish that every day, that's kind of the goal.
For those just joining us on Vibe 105, we're speaking with the co-host of Tim and Sid, Tim Micallef. Tim, when both you and Sid were hired at Sportsnet, you hosted Tim and Sid on the radio in the 1 to 4 p.m. time slot. But then in 2015, you guys were moved to TV in the 5 to 7 p.m.
Right.
Can you talk to us a little bit about what the preparation is like for a 2-hour TV show as opposed to a 3-hour radio show, and which format do you prefer?
The formats are so different. I would say, like, the biggest difference is Sid and I both prep a ton. I hope you can see it when you watch it, but we both prep a ton, and because we're focusing on, you know, every sport out there, or at least trying not to ignore anything, we got to study every sport, so it's not just one. The difference between radio and TV is, on radio, you can just go and you just talk. On TV, you have to worry about, you know, 30 other people trying to follow you or trying to give you the things that you need to talk about. So you have to provide, like, this roadmap for everybody else. Yeah. And on radio, you just take care of yourself, and everything else is good. But on TV, if you haven't provided everybody else with enough knowledge, then it can fall flat on its face.
As you know, too, when you were working at the Score in the early 2000s, social media was nowhere near what it is now. In terms of your experience hosting shows on both radio and TV, how has social media impacted or even changed the profession for you?
I think it makes people feel like they have more of a say, and I think they do have. On our show, we actually read tweets. A lot of places, they just ignore the tweets. They ask for them, and they ignore them. We'll read them, but I always think that people's reaction on Twitter, in social media as a whole, Instagram, Facebook, whatever it is that you're using, the bosses read that way more than anyone actually thinks they do. So they can actually have a say on that. And you know, when we were doing a podcast at the Score, our TV show had been turned off because the Score didn't have enough money to keep it going. Oh, wow. And when Sportsnet came calling, it was because of the podcast. It wasn't because of our national, highlight nightly show. It was because of what we were doing on the podcast and because of the buzz that it was creating on the internet. So it's kind of funny to look back and think, this grand goal of being on TV that a lot of people have wasn't the thing that got us our next opportunity. It was a podcast, and it was the buzz that social media helped us create.
Once again, for those just joining us on Vibe 105, we're speaking with the co-host of Tim and Sid, Tim Micallef. Tim, many of the Tim and citizens out there that have followed your career know that you've done play-by-play for many university and college-level sports. Now, if you were approached by Sportsnet and they gave you the opportunity to call a game for any major Toronto sports team, which team's game would you choose to call, and what would excite you most about calling that particular game?
Wow, that's a great question. I used to drive by the ACC even when it was built, and so I don't date myself too much. And I had a 1989 beat-up Ford Escort that I distinctly remember someone busting into through the back window and me not wanting to replace said back window because it would have cost more than the car was worth. And I remember driving by the ACC on my way to work at the Score as a volunteer and thinking one day I'll be able to broadcast the game out of there. So if it was Leafs or Raptors, it would kind of be a full circle thing for me to be able to go in there and broadcast the game. I've done some National Lacrosse League games in there for the Toronto Rock, but I've never done a Raptors or a Leafs game. I think that would be, if you gave me the choice, that would probably be where I go. And to choose one of them, I love both sports a ton. In fact, I'm driving right now to play hockey, and I still play basketball on Thursdays. So I don't know if I could choose between the Leafs and the Raptors, but it would be one of those two.
Yeah, we're going to send this off to Sportsnet. They own some rights.
Tell them.
Now, Tim, before we wrap up, what advice would you give to those college and university students out there who hope to one day follow your footsteps and become broadcasters on radio or TV?
I would say, and it sounds like a cliche, but it's not, be prepared to work and never turn down work, because you don't know who's watching, listening, and whatever the task may be. Like, I can remember walking down King Street, on weekends in the club district, carrying other people's food and thinking to myself, what the hell am I doing? Like, this is ridiculous. Like, I should be out partying with the rest of these people, and instead I'm carrying other people's food. But, putting in that work, let people know that I was serious about what I wanted to do. And I had to give up a lot of things along the way, but, when I look back now that I'm 40-something, I think that it was the great move. And I think I ended up where I wanted to be. So be prepared to work your rear end off, and don't say no to anything, because you're going to learn something no matter what you're doing in the business. Even if it's not what you want to be when you're done, accept the role, do it well, and people will notice.
Well, you heard it there, ladies and gentlemen. You can catch Tim and Sid weekdays, 5 to 7 p.m. on Sportsnet. Tim, we'd like to thank you for taking the time to chat with us here on Beyond the Game, and we wish you all the best.
Giancarlo, thanks a lot.
That was the co-host of Tim and Sid, Tim Micallef. Now, we're going to send it back to the studio for more Beyond the Game right here on Vibe 105.
This is Tim Micallef, and you're listening to Beyond the Game as we go beyond the game.
If you watch sport like right now, it'll be over.
Who's there? Gold medal in the face. Nation's capital, you're welcome and goodbye. Canada wins. You just got served, Environment Canada. You just got served, son.